So we're pleased to have Anne Charlton here with us today. Anne is the ALP candidate for the seat of Robertson in the upcoming federal election. Anne, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Anne, why should the people of Robertson vote for Anne Charlton?
Look, I'm a local person that cares very deeply about this community, and I'm a bit of a fighter. I can be quite feisty and very determined. I think it's one of the qualities that I bring to this election. So I think the people of Robertson need to vote for me as a Labor person, because we need some changes in our local electorate. I see all the time that we're left behind, our infrastructure is lagging behind, our services and the resources that we get. So we need somebody that's prepared to fight for the region.
What experience in governance would you bring to the role?
In terms of my workplace background, I've had quite a varied workplace, so it's given me a lot of opportunities to do different things. So I was formerly a director in the Federal Department of Health in Canberra. That was a while ago now, about just thinking 15 years ago, before we moved to the Central Coast. And that gave me a lot of background in bureaucracy and in health policy. I've worked for the Flying Doctors, I've worked for the Indigenous Health Services, and I'm somebody who, since I've been on the Central Coast, I've worked in community, and that's, I think, where I've got the greatest skill set that I bring to this role.
What are the two biggest policy priorities for the Labor Party if it's successful in May?
Look, for me, this region has been really sadly left behind. We need better roads, we need footpaths. When you go out and you see the level of infrastructure deficit that we have in this region, it's really demonstrable. Like, we need to make some big changes.
What do people in Robertson have most to fear about another term with the Liberal National Coalition government?
I think more of the same is what they have to fear. Over the last 5.5 years in this region alone, we've seen such extraordinary cuts and stagnation of service delivery and of our infrastructure. So I think that if the government continues in the way that it is, the people of Robertson are looking down the barrel of just lagging behind further down the statistics. We've got one of the highest levels in New South Wales of youth unemployment. We have really high domestic violence rates. As I've said before, our roads and our services are really lacking.
Your own Shadow Health Minister, Catherine King, was recently quoted as saying that national health reform has been repeatedly undermined by the short-term and combative nature of our political system. Why would people on the coast expect anything to be different from with a Labor government?
Medicare is in our DNA. You know, we are the party that created Medicare. We're the party that has continued to fight against privatisation of local health services. I'm sure you would be aware of the big fight that Labor, both state and federally, had around the proposed privatisation of the Wyong Hospital. We know that the government is on a trajectory to try and privatise so much of our healthcare system. I think this is really wrong. I think that it's a terrible false economy to leave anybody behind, and that includes healthcare. We need to make sure that people can access great services. You know, we are the largest region in New South Wales that doesn't have its own standalone palliative care facility. So I was so pleased to be able to announce $20 million to build a standalone palliative care facility, a public palliative care facility for this region.
How important is that in the party's priority list, and how quickly might we expect to have that happen here in the peninsula?
We are 100% committed to it. We've pledged already the money. So an elected Labor government, if I am your local member and we have a shortened Labor government in Australia, we certainly will build that facility.
There's been a lot of focus in the media in recent times around border security and offshore detention. Can you set out for us succinctly, what is Labor's position on those two things?
Yeah, look, on a personal level, it really saddens me to see the way that the Scott Morrison government has essentially put people in indefinite detention. I think that's wrong. I think economically it doesn't make any sense. And I think that we need to have a system in place where people can be assessed and not held in indefinite detention. I'm really pleased with Labor's policies around border security. One of the things that I think Labor's done that will make a big difference is agreeing to properly fund the UNHCR so that people in country can be assessed at their point of origin. So there's no need for the dangerous journeys that they then have to take to try and get to Australia.
Labor's website states that it believes in strong borders, offshore processing and turnbacks. It's got a ring of stop the boats to it. How is it really different from the Coalition's policy?
I think that you can have a much greater level of compassion while maintaining strong borders. I agree that we do need to have strong borders. I don't want to see innocent people, asylum seekers, making perilous journeys that could harm them. And I also don't want people coming into this country that could potentially do the wrong thing when they get here either.
Charlton has pledged to get rid of refunds for franking credits. What have you done to assess the impact that may have on the incomes of retirees here on the Central Coast?
I think that people understand that the franking credit refundability for people who no longer have a taxable income is not sustainable. It's a policy that is outdated and does need to change.
Can you set out for us on the record exactly what is the current position around climate change and the reduction of emissions going forward in Australia?
Look, for me, I guess climate policy sits over the top of everything else. It's the most important policy that we have. And if you look at the cuts and the chaos that has happened across on the other side of politics, my goodness, they don't even have a policy. They don't believe, so many of them don't even believe in climate change. How can you have an effective policy that Australians can believe in and trust in if you don't even believe that climate change exists? Labor has created a suite of policies around climate change that I'm really proud of and I'm actually really excited about because it'll be something that so many of our community members can engage with. First and foremost, we want to create cheaper, cleaner energy across the board for everybody in Australia. And we're going to do that by making sure that renewables play a greater role. So 50% renewables by 2030, I think it's a reasonable, achievable goal. It's not where we will ultimately need to be, but it's moving us in the right direction. I think having the battery rebate that Bill Charlton has announced will be really useful in terms of incentivising battery manufacturers to increase what they're doing in Australia already. We've got some really exciting technologies that are coming down the pipeline.
I think one of the inconsistencies that people point out is there are commitments to emission reduction on one hand, but at the same time there's support for growth in exploration, production and export of fossil fuels, coal and gas and other fossil fuels. How do people reconcile those two things?
I think that we'll have fossil fuels in the mix for a little while to come. I think that that's a reality that we need to face. But I think that over time, that our reliance on fossil fuels will reduce, and certainly with the commitments that Labor has given around cheaper, cleaner energy into the future and increasing our renewables, then that's a fact of life. We will see that our renewable industry will grow, and as it grows, our reliance on fossil fuels will lessen.
The state ALP has indicated they would ban drilling of gas in the Pilliga. Will that be replicated by the federal government in terms of moratoriums and bans on other exploration of gas?
Yeah, look, I can't talk about specifics because I'm not quite there yet. As your candidate, I'm somebody who's still developing in my understanding and knowledge of specific geographic areas.
As you can tell from the growing consternation with respect to PEP 11 here on the Central Coast, you referred to that earlier, would the Labor government seek to ban that project?
Look, I can't see any economic argument that supports further exploration off our coast here on the Central Coast.
Is it an issue that's important enough that you'd join the crossbench for that particular issue if the ALP were unable to prevent that from going forward?
Look, I don't think that it needs to come to even having that discussion. Locally here, I've been really inserting myself, if you like, into the argument. I went along to the briefing by the department that was held up in Newcastle. What I found out at the briefing is that the current exploration that is proposed, it is actually unlikely to go ahead.
And Charlton, thank you very much for answering our questions this morning. We wish you well, as we do to all the candidates in the upcoming election.
Thanks, Ross.
Okay.